me tell you something, brother. When I'm working on my 24-inch pythons, dude, I'm listening to Let's Find Out with Diego. Train, say your prayers, and listen to Let's Find Out with Diego. Ooh, what you gonna do, brother, when Let's Find Out with Diego runs wild on you?
Are you curious about the unknown, the unexplainable? Do you find yourself intrigued by the mysterious and paranormal side of our world? Join us on an adventure into the world of inexplicable discoveries and investigations that may someday give us the final answer as to what may be behind the veil of reality. The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia. It's another episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Thank you for taking this journey with me. On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest grew up loving weekends filled with marathons of B-movies featuring monsters and mutants. His love for the works of authors like H.P. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, and Lord Dunsany infuses his short stories and poetry with a dark and fantastical essence. With endings that don't often lean towards the happy side, these tales are sure to take you on a thrilling and eerie adventure into the unknown realms of horror and fantasy. All this plus more. Please welcome to Let's Find Out, author, poet, and explorer of the unknown, Bryn Grover. Bryn, my friend, thanks for being on the show. Yeah, man. You know, I've been looking forward for this interview for a while now because I met you over the summer. That wasn't that long ago. And over there in Wares Cave at the Bigfoot convention. And, you know, as with all conventions, especially in summer, it can get very busy. We didn't get to chat a whole lot, but how did it go that day for you?
I think it was a lot of fun. I think for me, more fun watching and meeting people than anything else, you know. I got to hang out with people like you, but I also know some of the authors that were there, Pamela Kinney and Brian Nowak and Michael Thompson. And of course, you know, Snarly hanging out in the corner doing his thing. So, you know, it's always fun going to these shows, not only just meeting new people. Of course, you had the guy, the Bigfoot skateboarding through the convention, right? So, I mean, who doesn't love a Bigfoot skateboarding, right? So, you know, yeah, I had a great time, and the weather was perfect too. I mean, you know, it was a beautiful day, a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it was on a June, and usually June's pretty doggone hot, but the weather was perfect. You know, some food trucks. I spent a lot of money that day, man. It's you know,
it's easy to do.
Absolutely, and as you can see, all of the listeners can't see, only you can. The displays on the back, a lot of that stuff came from these conventions, and so I love supporting the local artists and local vendors. But you know, they're great things. You know, if anybody ever thinks about it, would want to go to one, I highly recommend it because I'll get to meet great people like yourself, Bryn. And speaking of great things, I was reading over your bio, and we were having a conversation beforehand. You and I, you know, may have a few things in common. Now, and I can still kind of do this. Back in the day of Betamax and VHS, and then later on DVD, even the days of UHF, people who don't know about the UHF, you know, you turn the knob one way, and then there's a whole different knob on the bottom. You move all these channels you never thought you'd see.
Right.
And there was always great content on those, especially with the B movies and monster movies. And talking earlier, because you're looking at like Count Gore Duvall right behind you.
Yeah.
And back then he was Captain 20. He used to have a local show where like a creature feature type of thing. And one time it was a Creature from the Black Lagoon. And the gimmick back then was all the 7-Elevens would have these 3D glasses. And they would show it on 3D. And it glasses didn't work that great, but I loved it as a kid. I love all that stuff. Which of the movies influenced you on your journey to become a horror author? Because was this always the plan for you to become a writer, or is it just something that came out of your love for B movies?
I think it. I don't know if there's any one thing that triggered it. To be honest with you, I mean, it just kind of developed over time. Um, the reality is that my mom loved the old black and white horror movies, and I'm of a certain age where drive-in theaters used to be a huge thing. Now there's one out, probably half an hour or so from where you live out in Stevens City. But other than that, there's not much to go by around here. But my father hated those things. So I grew up in a car where my mom would take me for company just to have somebody with her, like I'm 2 years old, whatever, sitting in the back seat. Of course, I'd fall asleep at 2 years old, but I grew up in drive-in theaters watching black and white movies. And I continued to keep going to see monster movies even after they were color and, even after I was an adult until there was no more drive-in theaters. Now you gotta stream or, go to a regular theater or whatever. But I grew up with this stuff, and I loved, like you said, Count Gordeval and pulling up UHF and trying to find channels. There was always a Saturday creature feature kind of marathon going on that my father would let me watch. Sundays were reserved for football, Saturday nights for John Wayne, but I had the morning and early afternoon free to watch, black and white horror movies. So, if I'm watching them or It Came from Outer Space or Plan 9 or something like that, I mean, I think I was weaned on that stuff, and it's just in my DNA, to be honest with you.
So that out of your love for those kind of movies, and I loved it because you kind of read my mind. I was thinking about them as well, but there was also the interesting ones where not necessarily sci-fi, but the old Tarzan movies used to play because it used to play right after pro
Yep.
wrestling. I used to watch that, and then you switch the channel, and there's always something going on. I think it's great that back then those movies stayed alive because I think it influenced a lot of people, even movie directors down the line, that they wanted to make similar content. I guess now the special effects have evolved some, but there's something to it, to the old style of before CGI, when people
Oh,
had to
yeah.
work really hard to make these things look not only real but entertaining as well.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think I could actually go back and watch some Twilight Zone or Alfred Hitchcock and probably enjoy it more than I could CGI-laden films today. I think the storylines were better and the acting was better, and more of it was it's closer to reading a book than movies are today. I mean, there's more of your own imagination goes into it, and capturing more of the feeling. I think there's more effort. I definitely would rather see an Alfred Hitchcock today than most of anything else that's on TV.
That's interesting because nowadays nobody. Let me correct myself because I don't want to make anybody upset what I'm saying, but I don't think people talk about Alfred Hitchcock enough. At least not during the times when we were growing up, because he was the man.
He was the man, and his hour-long TV show was fantastic. And as a kid, I used to play the game of trying to find his silhouette, because his silhouette would be in the show somewhere if he didn't make an actual appearance. I mean, sometimes he would make an appearance in an episode, but I mean, I think most people probably knew him for Birds or something along those lines. They don't really think about all the other work that he did.
True, and there was always, like you're talking about, always an Easter egg in one of those episodes where talk about the silhouette. And I think some of the shows down the road kind of adapted that. I think one I could think about is not a paranormal. Well, I guess it was kind of paranormal, not even horror, but psych, where you always have to, each episode there was a pineapple and it's a scene you have to
Right.
find it. So those kind of things people don't think about. The people who were the originators of these things influence what's going on now. So with that being said, because if you look at shows like Twilight Zone, Dark Shadows, Tales from the Dark Side, all these kind of things where these, one would say they were kind of like short stories on television, which brings
Right.
me to your books, because you chose to do these in short stories instead of a long form novel. In my opinion, I think it's a little more challenging because you have to always create something new. Because the book, your current book had, what is it, 9 stories right now, short stories?
The Jamie's Closet one.
Yes, sir.
No, I've got a copy in front of me. I'm going to look at the table of contents because, yeah, it only has 9. I mean, two of them are fairly long, kind of like a novella, but the others are shorter. But yeah, that one has 9. I think the book prior to that maybe has 12.
And and that's the thing. So maybe there's something to it, because I can understand when somebody writes a book and it's going to be, I don't call it long form, but then there's the added challenge where you're doing it and you're breaking them up in different stories. You have to be even more extra creative in a way, because you have to really start from scratch each story. So how does that process go? Do you find it to be a little more challenging than doing the other thing I talked about, as far as longer, like a novel?
For me, no. I think I have a great admiration and respect for people that are committed to the long story and the novel. I mean, there's people that Brian Nowak, Jeff Strand, all these people, Nick Roberts, other people that are just cranking them out. Ronald Malfi's another local guy in Maryland. It's probably one of the greatest voices of this generation of horror writers, and they're cranking out these long stories. For me, I think it has more to do with the way my brain works. It's I'll call it a self-diagnosed ADHD, like squirrel. I'm here, I'm there, I'm all over the place. So I have like journals full of ideas, and it's easier for me to take and run with something as a short story and run through that idea and move on to the next one, because I'm chasing the shiny object, the squirrel or whatever. I don't know that I have the focus and the long-term, dedication to throw out a 400-page novel. I can throw out a 400-page collection of short stories, but it's in chunks. It's like the old "how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time," right? I'm taking one bite with one story, and then I can move on to the next one. Whereas sustaining the suspense and the horror and the build-up over the long haul, I don't know. I haven't really given it a try. I mean, I did write a fantasy novel, a long time ago in a galaxy far away, and it's only fit for the fireplace, to be honest with you. So I haven't really tried to go back and do that kind of thing, but I have great admiration for those people that do, and I don't know that I even could.
Now, you mentioned some great guys. A lot of them, a couple of them been on this show, but
There's a
yeah.
lot of great talent out there, which is why my reading pile is so huge.
Oh, actually, on the other side here, I have a whole set of books that I haven't yet cracked open. So what I like to do, and I might be the only person to do this, I prefer buying the books from the actual authors themselves and have them signed and have them on my bookshelf. But I don't like reading through them, because then I go again and I download them onto my tablet, because I don't want to damage my books. Is that weird?
Well, I do that. I do that some, and I understand. But when I do have one that I read through that's been signed, I'm very careful with, I'm not bending it or dog earing it or whatever. I want to keep it in pretty good condition, But I always enjoy it, picking them up in person myself. I want to support them. I don't want to support Amazon as much as I want to support the individual person. But I also want to be able to get the interaction with them. I mean, and when you start to seeing these people, and they put your name in a book, often they'll write something that's interesting based on, your conversations or, interactions with them. And of course, if you get somebody like Ronald Kelly, the godfather of Southern Gothic horror, the big man himself, he draws pictures in there while he's writing his inscription to you. I mean, like, he goes to a whole new level of awesomeness. And, so I have his books both in written and in digital, because, so I do like you do, not for all of them, but for some of them.
Yeah, because it's one of those things that, if an author's going to take their time to sign my book, that means a lot to me. So I want to preserve it as best as I can. Now, my graphic novels is a different story. They're going to beat up, but that's okay. So going back to something you said earlier, some of your earlier writings from a long time ago, where looking at it now from this perspective of today, like, oh, maybe that wasn't that great, which is okay. Because it's the same thing when I started podcasting and listened to some of the first episodes, like, oh my goodness, that was awful. But it works. It served its purpose. So if we're going to go back to that time, when did that hit you that you wanted to start writing? Because you said it wasn't always in the plan, but something happened where you got put that pen to paper and you just started writing.
I think I don't know. I mean, I was writing in middle school, but I mean nothing that was of any value, and most of the writing was very, very, very short stories, like a couple of pages or poetry or whatever. I don't think I started trying to get into horror writing, to be honest with you. I think if there was a trigger, the trigger would have been having a traumatic brain injury while I was in the service. So it changed something inside of me. It messed up with my memory. At the time, it caused a pretty good deal of depression, I think. And writing was kind of an outlet in a way. So, I mean, I had already been writing, but I think it became more focused and started building in momentum. But I don't think I didn't really get, I mean, I started then, but I don't think I really started trying to focus on doing it. And probably about, I don't know, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that, when I started putting more serious effort into it. I think that maybe the TBI generated, some momentum, but I was still in first or second gear, now I guess I'm going downhill and gravity's pulling me a little bit faster.
Well, as I look through your site, I mean, you have a good amount of books under your belt at this time. So because we're talking about Jamie's Closet. Let's go back to that. What is the significance of the name of Jamie's Closet? I'm looking at the cover, and it's a pretty awesome cover.
So, interestingly enough, I'm going to tell you about the cover before I tell you about the book and the origin of that title. I had been working with the publisher that it kind of just fell through, and I had this idea of what I wanted to do, and one of the stories in the book is called The Shadow Man, and it's about something, your typical monster in the closet kind of thing, my own twist on it, which I'll tell you about shortly because it ties into the title of the book. But what I really wanted was, kind of a dark situation with some red eyes coming out of a closet, and they were working on some stuff, and then they just dropped the ball and quit. It just so happens that a previous guest of yours is a friend of mine, Brian Nowak. And, we were talking, we live nearby, we do a bunch of shows together, like you saw us together out at Wires Cave. We probably do 4 or 5 shows together a year, maybe, I don't know, I haven't counted them, but and then we do separate ones where we might be at the same show, like we're going to be at Cryptid Halloween, but not together. But at any rate, he said, well, let me give it a shot. So Brian Nowak created my cover for me. And when he sent me the first draft of it, this was it. I'm like, you don't even need to change anything. I love this just the way it is, right? So it wasn't a lot of back and forth for months and then dropping the ball like it was with the publisher that I was working with. Brian cranked it out. I don't even know, less than a week. I don't know. And I loved it. So I'm like, yes, that's the one. So as far as the title goes, my sister's name is Jamie. So you've lived in this general vicinity. So, you can maybe associate with this a little bit because we were raised in Northern Virginia as little kids. In the 60s, we lived in some projects in Alexandria, and my dad worked for IBM, and IBM decided it wanted to try to save money by moving factory out to the country, right, for some of the stuff that they were doing. So they moved my father and I don't know how many other people out to Broadway, Virginia, which isn't far from the Wires Cave area. But now 50 years ago, at this point, it's getting closer to 60 years ago, Broadway, Virginia was nowhere. It wasn't on a map. It was just farms surrounded by Mennonites, the people in their blue bonnets and suits. So, the Virginia version of the Amish, basically. I mean, the Mennonites are kind of like that, a little more advanced technologically on what they do, but basically you went from projects with lots of people around us and friends to play with to the middle of a cornfield and, cattle, we had nothing to do. We were absolutely bored. So I started making up stories to tell her about monsters coming out of her closet. And our parents' rooms were upstairs. We were in this house. It had like a basement with a couple of bedrooms downstairs. So we're downstairs. The parents are upstairs. And I would tell her stories about things coming out of her closet. She got to where she was having nightmares. And then she ended up getting put on medication. And I ended up going out back to pick my own switch to get the beaten with, So it's kind of an homage to her, because I mean, in some ways, I got my storytelling starting with her, even though I wasn't writing things at the time. I mean, I was storytelling because we had nothing else to do from our perspective. We couldn't go outside and play in the streets with the other kids because there weren't any other ones. Now, we were only out there for like a year and a half, and IBM figured out they couldn't get the talent, they couldn't get what they needed out in Broadway, so they just brought everything back to the city, basically. At the time, it's probably a lot easier for them now. There's more people out there, there's a better infrastructure, there's the internet and everything else that didn't exist, in the 60s. But, of course, that cover and the story of the Shadow Man is basically got its foundations in me telling her about the Shadow Man in her closet that comes out at night. And there's a couple of other stories in there that are based on our life experiences. And then, of course, there's other ones that are based on other things. I mean, the story opens up with the book opens up with a story called The Commandant's Problem. And that was based on, studying World War II, but also living in Germany in the service. I had gone to Dachau and other concentration camps. So, I just had this idea. And on my recent trip to Poland, I went to Auschwitz, Birkenau, and to the Plazow concentration camp, which was the one from Schindler's List. So I'm like, I have more Nazi horror stories in mind now after that trip.
Oh, I could imagine. And I'm gonna sidetrack real quick, because you mentioned Poland earlier. You said you traveled there, but they have a legend of their own type of cryptid there as well. I find it very fascinating. What was it?
So in this case, they have multiple legends of cryptids. One of them that I didn't get to see was called a leshy. He's kind of like a forest creature that, like a bipedal elk kind of monster with antlers. It kind of protects the forest and the animals within it. I didn't get to go see him. There's statues of him, but it was like 4 hours away from where I was at. But in Krakow, where I was at, they have a legend of the Wawel dragon, and there's a castle there called the Wawel Castle. He's also called the Krakow dragon. And in the Middle Ages, this dragon would come out of a den, and the den is still there. Come out of a den, terrorize the city and the countryside. Now, in modern times, he's no longer a terror to the city. He's a tourist attraction, and they've built like an 8-foot bronze statue of him. And it has 7 heads, which someone had to tell me that, because I didn't even realize it at first, because it has 1 head coming off the neck, your typical dragon thing. But at the ends of, wings and other joints, there's like little dragon heads. So it's got like 7 little dragon heads all on it. But it's made out of bronze. It sits right outside of the dragon's lair, which you can go in, except for it was closed while I was there because of some leak or construction cave issues of some sort. I don't really know. But every 4 minutes or so, the thing breathes fire. It's because they have a gas pipe going through it. So, of course, I went by this multiple times during the 2 weeks that I was there, daytime and nighttime. It's much more fun at night, seeing it light up and the fire come out of it. And, of course, I had to pick up, a plushie of the Krakow dragon and a little, 3 or 4 inch figurine of the Krakow dragon, so he can sit next to my Mothman and my, my Bigfoot and, the other things that I've got going on, my Flatwoods monster and other stuff in the collection,
Oh, your collection is starting to sound a lot like mine. So they gave this creature kind of like the Mothman treatment, right? Minus the fire, because I don't think they had. I think in our neck of the woods, I think the town would not like having like gas coming through a statue breathing fire. It seems something kind of dangerous, but
yeah, they probably wouldn't. But yeah, they definitely gave it fire. I mean, the legend was the fire breathing dragon, right? So. It's a pretty popular dude, and no matter where you're walking around, I was standing in the main square called Rheineck Clowning, which is surprisingly enough, Krakow did not get destroyed during World War II, like Warsaw, Gdansk, or any of the other major cities of Poland. This one was preserved. But the street vendors all along there, everybody that has like one of these little pop-up booths, which they start filling up the marketplace in the mornings, everybody has some version of the Krakow dragon for sale, whether it's a plushie or a figurine or a piece of plastic, a flag, a hat. I mean, I picked up a T-shirt that's kind of like maybe I'll wear it to Cryptid Halloween so you can see it. But it says Krakow City, and it's kind of got like a Jurassic Park vibe to it, but it's got the Krakow dragon in the middle of the picture instead of a T-Rex or something like that. So I mean, he's very popular there, and he was on my bucket list of things to see and do when I was in Krakow.
I'm kind of jealous, man. You know, I almost just go to Poland just for that. I mean, if it's safe to travel there now, the way things are going now, who knows? So
yeah, it was safe. I mean, and of course, you know, I guess you gotta keep Ukraine in mind at some point, but the Ukrainian border from Krakow was probably 2.5, 3 hours away to the east. I was pretty close to the Slovakian border, so I did take a trip into Slovakia. So speaking of old movies, this kind of ties into that a little bit. I went to Orava Castle, which, if you're familiar with it, is where they filmed Nosferatu in 1922. So I went to Count Orlok's castle, and when you get to the very top stairs, you know, to the top highest level, they have like a 6-foot tall statue or mannequin, whatever, you know, in a glass case of Count Orlok. So of course I had to take pictures of me and Count Orlok hanging out. But I also went to Elizabeth Bathory's castle. Are you familiar with her at all?
absolutely, yes.
So I went to her castle and, you know, took a bunch of pictures and of course I came back with, you know, souvenirs from there as well. One of the things they do there is they have a $0 euro bill that has her picture on it. You know, it's a Slovakian euro with, you know, the Countess Elizabeth Bathory. It's not worth anything except as a collector's item, but of course I now have an Elizabeth Bathory's $0 euro bill.
You know, and for those that are interested in that history of that is a very terrifying story of what was going on back then with the way she chose to bathe in, or what she chose to bathe in. It's very disturbing. I mean, one could say is maybe that, but as close as a real life vampires you can get.
I have heard, and I don't know how much truth this is, or even I don't remember where I read it, but I have heard that even though she's 120 years or so after Vlad Tepes, that she's like a distant cousin related to him. So, you know, you potentially have two vampire stories in one family line.
That would make for, you know, I'll definitely can buy that. I can see there might be a connection there with
Well,
the way
you got to understand, you know, the location too. I mean, you know, the Austrian-Hungarian and Hungarian Empire controlled Slovakia. It also controlled, you know, Wallachia and Romania, and Vlad was like part-time enemy and part-time ally of, you know, Hungary. So, and then it was the King of Hungary that had to put Elizabeth Bathory under house arrest when the complaints became too much for her bathing techniques.
you know what? The bathing techniques. I love that. That's very awesome because there's I don't want to spoil it for those who already know. Great. For those who don't, you want to get into something a little terrifying, definitely do the research and history of that one. But then you also, not only do you write short stories, my friend, but you also released in July 2024 Catacombs, which is a collection of horror poetry. And I'm going to sound kind of like a little silly, but this is the first time where I've seen such a collection just based on on a horror theme.
You know, I didn't know this existed myself until, I mean, I've been writing it and I've had horror poetry published in anthologies and, you know, a handful of places, but I hadn't seen this type of collection until I went to AuthorCon, who Scares the Care earlier this year in Williamsburg, and I saw a handful of people that had things out there, and I'm like, well, man, I've got enough stuff to put something out, so why don't I? So, you know, I did. It's not really got a theme to it. I mean, it's horror poetry, and you know, the themes bounce around. I mean, There's stuff about witches. There's stuff about mental health, turning your mental health issues into horror stories. I mean, it's kind of all over the place. But it is a collection of horror poetry, and I had a lot of fun putting it together and throwing it out there in the world.
And were you writing these in between the short stories, or something you did after you released James Closet?
Some of them were written before that. I mean, one of them was published in the Horror Writers Association had a thing, I don't know, 2 years ago for Mental Health Awareness Month in May, where they asked writers to put together stories and poems and little treatises and whatever they could put together for, a free book that they put out of horror and hope. And so I submitted a poem called This Wretched Curse, which is about, the things that are bothering you in your mind. How do you deal with them? You're going to therapy, it's not working. Therapy's not working, but you find a place to get rid of them. You get rid of them by putting them on pen and paper and handing them to somebody else, right? So it was like, how does horror play into writing? So, I mean, that's in there. Last year, I was involved in an anthology with a whole bunch of great writers. And I think the foreword was even by Brian Keene, none other than him, called Dark Corners of the Old Dominion. I don't know if you've seen that around at any of the shows or not, but it's got maybe 23 authors in it. And since you're familiar with the area, my poem was about the Bunny Man of Clifton. So if you're familiar with that legend, he was a pretty popular thing when I was first learning how to drive. He was a big local urban legend. So I had already had things that were written for other anthologies that ended up in here. Like I maintained the rights, after a certain period of time. And I think of writing simultaneously, really. I mean, I might work on a short story. I might write a poem or two. I might work on a short story. So like I said before, it's kind of like the squirrel thing. I'm like, oh, there's a nut. Let me go chase that one for a while. So it has a little bit to do with the way my brain just switches. Like, here, go there, go there, go there. So multiple projects are going on at any given time, to be honest with you. So.
No, I completely understand. Interestingly enough, I just started a new project with this show as well because I'm interested in a lot of subjects, and then I have to create a whole different vehicle because it's a little bit outside of the scope of what I do, but it interests me. I want to talk about it. Interests you. You want to write about it. So I'm going down the line because you have Catacombs, you have Jamie's Closet, All Things End, and the Golem and other stories. So there's a beautiful theme in here. So this is where the show's going to get a little bit of fun. I'm going to challenge you, but not in a bad way.
Uh-oh.
So, yeah. So let's pick whichever one of the books in a short story. If you were to make a soundtrack to one of your stories, if you could pick a story and put a soundtrack to it, what would it be?
I don't even know how to process that question. Am I supposed to write the soundtrack, or am I just supposed to pick some kind of,
put
music?
Put a quarter in the
Put a quarter in the
jukebox.
jukebox?
Yeah.
You know what? I think I would take All Things End as the book, and maybe I would crank up some cream and play Strange Brew.
All right.
So there you go.
No, that's perfect, man. Fit the theme and everything. So I'm going to jump onto another one. So if you were to pick one of your stories, you say, doggone it, this story would make a great movie. Which one would you pick?
I think I would pick Oskagu, which is in Jamie's Closet. And so one of the things I've been doing in books is I've been creating, I won't say I'm creating a universe because I'm not Brandon Sanderson or any of these other great writers, right? I don't have any delusions of grandeur, but I've been creating my own little universe that I call the Dogu Tale. So the Dogu, if you're not, are you familiar with them, or maybe listeners may not be, they were a Native American tribe in Virginia that doesn't exist anymore. So, and there's a handful of places in Virginia named after them. But since they don't exist and there's not really an extant history of them, I can't be like nitpicked real hard, like, well, no, that's not whatever. So I've built some stories around it. And in that particular story, takes place in a rural area in Virginia, and there's a rite of passage at the end of the fall season, and people that are, going to graduate from high school and life as adults and whatever, they have to go up this mountain and spend the night, basically. But there's something that lives on this mountain, and Oskagu is like a Nanticoke word, which means dark or opaque. There's a dark presence up there that predates the Europeans. It predates the Native Americans, but they had legends about it. So I don't want to blow the story wide open, but it also had somewhat of an origin in a book that I read. And then I can't remember the author's name right now. Man, I wish I could. But I read this book about language and what we've lost with the invention of the alphabet. So part of the gist of that book is things were handed down by an oral tradition for however many thousands of years. So there's a lot to be said about, passing things on and remembering details and sounds and smells and things that you're trying to portray verbally that you kind of lose a little bit of with A, B, and C. You kind of lose some of that, but it also delved into a lot of Native American and other cultures around the world of various legends they have of, the trees are alive and you can commune with nature and you can talk to the birds and that kind of thing. So in Oskagu, the black thing, the trees are sentient there, as opposed to the trees in your neighborhood, right? They still remember the old ways and they're sustained by this thing that's there. But this thing doesn't always act evil or kill. I don't want to say anymore because I might be trying to give away my whole story. But I think that's the one that I would take because it's kind of like you're coming of age and you're going to go face into the unknown. It's one of the longer stories in the book. Maybe it could be a novella by itself, if I didn't put it into the collection. But I think that's the one I would pick because I think there's a lot of undertones in regards of things that pre-existed, what we think we know, and the evolution of language and communicating with the world around us and being able to see and understand the things that are around us, like Eskimos have, so I've heard, a score of words for snowflake because not everything is the same. And in my brain, having lived in Germany, I view that as the perspective of, in America, a castle is a castle is a castle is a castle. But in Germany, there's 8 different words for different, it could be a term or a Festung or a Palast or a Schloss or a Burg, or, it really depends on how it was built and what the purpose was for which it was built. So I think there's a lot of lost language that can be captured in this, that would be the one that I would turn into a movie.
Awesome. And you're a very well-traveled person and you've done a lot of things. During your travels, if you were to go back to your travels, and because I know we talk about Elizabeth Bathory and that's terrifying in itself. If you go all the countries that you lived in or traveled to, can you pick one of the more horrifying, whether it's some sort of paranormal entity or folklore that's like part of the one that says, man, that's really messed up?
Well, obviously, Elizabeth Bathory, I don't know if it's folklore or true, but that's pretty jacked up story.
Yes.
And of course, Vlad Tepes, I think we talked about previously, pretty jacked up story. And I went there and explored Transylvania with my oldest son a handful of years ago. And when you get to Poinary Castle, not Bran Castle. Now, Bran Castle's fun. That's the one that they say, Stoker built his story around, and, they play that up, as a tourist kind of thing. And we did do an after hours nighttime tour of the place. But if you go to the real Dracula Castle, Poinary, it's in the Transfiguran Mountains, and, it's a long ways away from Brazov and other sites associated with Dracula. And you have to go up like 1,500 steps working your way up this mountain. And you cross this kind of like a little bridge in between 2 gorges kind of thing. It's not real long, 50 feet maybe, I don't know. But as you cross it, they have mannequins stuck and impaled on poles as you're crossing over to the mountain to the other side. So you've already busted your butt trying to climb this mountain, and then all of a sudden there's all these things impaled in front of you. So you can kind of get the feeling for what the Ottoman soldiers might have seen, or what other Romanians, Wallachians, Hungarians might have seen, and how terrifying it would be to walk into a forest of impaled people and like, do I really want to storm this castle? I mean, look what's going on here.
It was amazing strategy for back then, because you kind of read my mind. I was thinking about, I wonder if they have any of the original stakes there, preserved something where they actually impaled one of the invading soldiers, but you never know.
I don't know if they do or not. I mean, I didn't see one, but you never know. I mean, the other things that are pretty wild for me is when you go to an ossuary. I mean, they have one in Brno, they have one in Sedlec. They have several spread out throughout Eastern Europe. But when you go into a place like that where the chapel or the prayer room or some part of it is basically made out of human skulls and bones that are stacked up, I mean, it's kind of different for an American.
Yeah, I think so. Not something you probably see here in the States.
No.
Maybe in pictures. So, my friend, we're coming close to the end of the show, and I'm going to throw a couple more questions. But let's do this. We have a little fun here. Let's go back to Let's go back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where B movies were the thing. We still have black and white televisions. What would be a great night for you? What to watch and what snacks would you be eating that night?
I don't know what snacks I'd be eating. Obviously, popcorn would have to be playing in. But you know what? For me, I would love to go back and mix it up a little bit with old Universal Studios kind of stuff. Let me watch a Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. Throw in some Creature from the Black Lagoon. Some Dracula, some werewolf, and some mummy, and make an all night of Universal monsters. And since sometime, I don't know when they became popular, or even when they started, but I would probably have a whole bunch of Reese's with me as well.
Oh, I think I can tell you when these Reese's became very more popular. Most of the Reese's Pieces because of the E.T. movie came out in 80,
right,
81, 82, something like that. Around that time.
Yeah, it was about that time. But I remember Reese's, not the pieces themselves, just Reese's from prior to that. And I remember as a little kid, my parents gave me money. I don't know how old I was, 10, whatever. They gave me money to go to a Boy Scout camp, and it was to be able to buy merit badges or whatever. I spent every penny of it on Reese's cups in the camp store. I didn't buy a stinking merit badge, nothing that I really needed. I just loaded up on 1 billion calories of sugar from Reese's.
No, you're right. I tell you this much with this Reese's, I get sick off of them. When I was a kid trick-or-treating, the neighbors that gave me the Reese's, those are the neighbors that I liked and would not get 10 pounds of toilet paper wrapped around their vehicles in the trees. So for the listeners of Let's Find Out that want to learn more about you, your books, and where they can meet you and find you, where can they find out?
You can find out probably the best way to do it is on my Facebook page, Bryn Grover, author. It's easy to find. But if you want to see me in person, after this show airs, my next event after that will be Cryptid Halloween in Ranson, West Virginia, with the lovely host Snarly Yow. And I think you're going to be there as well, Diego. I'm not sure. I think you'll be there. A bunch of other great people will be there. After that, I think I'm at the Halloween or Hanover Independent Book Festival. And I think the Fredericksburg Independent Book Festival falls after that as well. So I'm around. The events are listed on the website. And of course, the Facebook page gets updated regularly, where I even put up stuff on my travels, and graveyard tourism is a big thing for me. So every week there's a graveyard post of some sort on there. So Follow the page, check it out. Come see me in person. Love to meet everybody. Oh,
Yes,
you know, I do have some events before your show that I'm looking forward to, but those are the ones that follow it.
man, and I look forward to seeing you again. Definitely Crypto Halloween and Ranson, and probably more shows to come. We'll talk some more. I think let's bring you back next year. Let's talk more B movies. Let's talk. Probably by then you'll have another book as well. So I'd love to bring you back and have you on as a guest again.
Sounds like a plan, Raph.
Thank you, my friend. This has been another excellent episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Please check us out on all our social media pages, as well as on YouTube and Rumble. Like, share, and subscribe. Also, Let's Find Out is on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Catch the show on Saturdays at 2 a.m. For more information, please visit KGRADB.com. That's KGRADB.com. Together, we will get one step closer to finding out. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Until next time, my friends.
Let's find out with Diego, the power of Diego Mania.
All content for Let's Find Out is property of co-host Diego and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, co-host Diego, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.